My name is Madison Blake. I'm 35, CEO of a mid-sized analytics firm in Chicago, and apparently not welcome at my own sister's wedding. It happened on a Thursday afternoon right in the middle of our quarterly investor review. My phone, which was face down and supposedly on silent, buzzed once. I ignored it. Then twice. A third time. By the fourth, our COO was glancing at me, and the CEO had paused mid-sentence. My cheeks flushed. "Excuse me," I muttered, sliding out of the glass-walled conference room into the hallway. I didn't even check the messages at first. I just needed to breathe. But then I did. There were 5 texts from Elaine, my mother. The last one was in all caps. "You're not invited. Haley doesn't want you there." I stood frozen reading it again. Then again. I was paying for the wedding. Not partially, not symbolically. I had written the check for the venue, the caterer, the photographer, and the 6-tier cake. Every ridiculous detail. Haley insisted on chandeliers in the garden, imported roses, a string quartet playing pop covers. I funded it all. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. Something inside me just clicked off. A strange calm settled over me. The kind of cold calm you only feel when the flood's already passed and you're standing in the wreckage. I unlocked my phone and opened my email app. The thread with the event coordinator was right there. I typed one line, subject immediate cancellation. Haley and Travis wedding body, please cancel all services under my name. Effective immediately. Sent. Then I went back into the boardroom like nothing had happened. The war had begun. That evening on the drive home, I didn't play music. Just silence, and the image of my little sister Haley in her future wedding gown, walking down an aisle I paid for, surrounded by a family I had supported for decades, and I wasn't even allowed to be there. I passed the old exit to our childhood home in a suburb just outside Peoria and felt the tightness in my chest bloom. The first time I learned to take care of everything, I was 11. I was the one who called the locksmith when Dad forgot to pick us up, and Mom's keys were locked inside the car. Haley, then 6, had fallen asleep with a popsicle still melting in her hand. At 15, I called the water company to negotiate a payment plan after I overheard my mother sobbing quietly in the bathroom. I used her name, her social security number. I had memorized everything by then. I forged her signature on a check once just to avoid a shutoff. I was the responsible one, the reliable one, the one they called when anything fell apart. My parents always said, "Maddie, you've got your head screwed on straight." But what they meant was, "You'll fix it so we don't have to." When I graduated summa cum laude, I invited them to my speech. They missed it, said Haley had the flu and couldn't be left alone. When I got my first bonus 6 figures, they asked for help with Mom's mortgage. When Haley got engaged, her voice was breathless over the phone. Travis proposed, "Can you believe it?" And I was genuinely happy for her. I was. I should have known what was coming. Small things. You don't have to worry about the whole wedding. 2 weeks later, she and Mom showed up in a file with a spreadsheet that looked like a small corporation's quarterly budget. They told us they said no, I thought it was a joke. Mom looked at me. "It's just a special day." I stared at the breakdown of $9 a deposit for a harvest, just in case they wanted a different sound. They used phrases like, "We're just brainstorming," and "It's flexible," but somehow I was always the one signing the checks. Travis's family barely involved. Haley said his parents had old-fashioned ideas and wanted to keep it small, but my mom's eyes never left mine across the room. The code was clear. "We'll figure it out" meant Madison will figure it out. So I did. I created a separate folder on my laptop titled Haley's Wedding, Finances. I tracked every vendor, every estimate, and every receipt. There was a part of me, some wounded teenage version still hiding under all the spreadsheets, who believed maybe this would finally earn me a place. Not the place of a reliable ATM, not the fallback, but the sister, the daughter. The one who mattered was because she was loved, not needed. But slowly that fantasy began to erode. Cake tastings happened without me. I learned about the bridal shower through a photo on Haley's Instagram. When I asked why I wasn't added to the group chat planning the bachelorette weekend, Haley left a voicemail. It was just getting cluttered with all the vendor stuff you were posting. We thought it'd be cleaner to keep it separate. I felt like a project manager, not a bridesmaid, not a sister, just someone facilitating a dream I wasn't even allowed to witness. But the final blow didn't come from a message or a party I wasn't invited to. It came from a sentence half-spoken, not meant for me at all. That Tuesday, I stopped by the florist to drop off the final payment in person. I don't know why. I think I wanted anyone, to say thank you, to look me in the eye and acknowledge what I had done. As I waited by the counter, I heard Haley's voice from the back room. She was on the phone, laughing lightly. Then she said, "God, she just makes everything about her. It's like I get it, you have money. But this is my wedding, not her business launch." The florist didn't look up. My fingers clenched around the credit card in my hand. Then came the worst part. Her voice lowered to a near whisper, and she said, "Honestly, I just wish she'd send the money and stay out of it. I don't remember paying. I don't remember getting in my car. But I remember the burn behind my eyes as I sat at a red light gripping the steering wheel like it might anchor me to something real. That night I didn't sleep. But I made a plan. I woke up the next morning with a kind of clarity I hadn't felt in years. Not the empowering rise and shine type of clarity people post about online. No, this was colder. Sharper. Like waking up to find the house you built has already burned to the ground and realizing you're still holding the match. This wasn't about love anymore. It was about control. I thought of all the birthdays I never got to celebrate because Haley had a recital or Mom had a migraine. I thought of the time my father, David, who now only called when he needed help filing his taxes, lost his job and blamed me for not being home enough to keep things together. I was 19. I had 2 part-time jobs and a full course load. I spent a decade believing that maybe if I just gave more, they'd see me. Not for what I could do, but for who I was. Instead, they saw me as a wallet with legs. So I started documenting. I created a private email account and began forwarding everything: texts, voicemails, invoices. I saved screenshots of group chats and clipped images from social media where they praised Haley for handling everything so gracefully. It was methodical, clinical. I wasn't just a jilted sister. I was a CEO reviewing a failed investment, and the returns miserable. I kept my tone, even my smiles polite. I showed up when asked, signed checks without comment. I let them build the fantasy wedding on my foundation of funds and silence. All the while I was pulling threads bit by bit. The final unraveling began with Carol. Carol was the caterer, a warm, no-nonsense woman who reminded me of someone's favorite aunt. During a confirmation call, I made small talk. "You must be swamped. I can't imagine how many calls Haley's been making. She must be wearing you thin." There was a pause, just a few seconds too long. Then Carol cleared her throat. "Oh, sweetheart," she said gently. "Your mother told us to only speak with her. She said you were going through a difficult patch, that you needed space. A difficult patch." That phrase hit like a backhand. They weren't just excluding me, they were rewriting the story, painting me as unstable to justify my absence, erasing me from the picture I had paid for. I felt something crack inside. But this time it didn't break me. It freed me. I thanked Carol and hung up. Then I called the venue, the band, the photographer. I confirmed that everything was still booked in my name and that I had final authority. I didn't cancel, not yet. I waited. The rehearsal dinner was scheduled for Friday night at a rooftop restaurant in downtown Chicago, one of those modern glass and concrete places with a view that makes people gasp. It had been Haley's dream venue, and I had booked the private space 8 months in advance. It cost me $15,000. I paid in full, and I showed up. When I entered, the air turned. My mother, Elaine, perfectly coiffed in a lavender pantsuit, froze mid-sentence. Haley glanced up from her champagne, her face pale under layers of blush. "Oh, you made it," she said flatly, like I was an unexpected plus one. I smiled. I wouldn't miss it. No one made room for me at the main table, so I sat near the end. Alone. The waiter took my drink order without meeting my eyes. No one asked how I was. At one point, I overheard my mother whisper to Travis's mom, "We're just so grateful Madison could make it. She's been under a lot of pressure lately. So fragile." Fragile. I wanted to laugh, but I didn't. I waited. When it was time for toasts, I let them go first. My father talked about love and laughter. My mother wept softly. Haley's maid of honor read a poem that sounded pulled from Pinterest. Then I stood. "Hi, everyone," I said, lifting my glass with a practiced steady smile. "I'd like to say a few words." Chairs shifted. Forks were set down. "Haley, Travis, I wish you nothing but joy and honesty in your life together." A soft hum of polite approval rippled through the room. And I know how much effort it takes to create a night like this. For example, this beautiful space, just $15,000, paid up front. A steal. There was a pause. Confused glances. My mother's fingers froze around her wine glass. The 5-course meal with wine pairings, 22 grand, and worth every cent judging by the sea bass. Someone laughed nervously. A few heads turned toward Haley, whose face had gone completely still. "And Haley, that dress you'll be wearing tomorrow, the custom Vera dress you picked, $8,500. It looked stunning on the designer's website." Silence fell like a curtain. Then I turned toward Travis's mother, Mrs. Hamilton. "I just want to thank you truly for your understanding. I've been told I've had some mental instability this year. Since I've been under so much stress, I shouldn't be contacted. That I'm fragile." My smile didn't waver. "It's a miracle I'm lucid enough to be here. Or to say, pay the final bills." Elaine's mouth opened, then closed again. Haley looked like she might faint. I set my glass down gently. "To family," I said. "May we always remember who showed up." And then I walked away. No tears, no shouting, just that same steady, practiced calm. Outside, the wind was sharp against my skin. I pulled my coat tighter and took the stairs down instead of the elevator. When I reached the street, I heard my name. Madison Haley's voice cracked with emotion. She grabbed my arm, eyes wild. "You ruined everything. How could you?" I looked at her, this woman I had given everything to. The center of our family's attention. The son I'd circled for years, hoping to be noticed. "I didn't ruin it," I said softly. "I just stopped pretending." She opened her mouth to argue. But I wasn't finished. "I gave you the wedding of your dreams. Every last detail. And now I'm giving you one more gift. My absence. Effective immediately." I stepped back. "We're done." She didn't follow me. The next morning I slept in for the first time in weeks. No vendors to follow up with. No emergency texts from my mother asking if I'd reconsider just for Haley's sake. No financial spreadsheets blinking on my screen, like unpaid debts of emotional labor. I didn't hear from any of them. Not a single call. It was like I'd been erased. And in a strange, aching way, it was exactly what I'd needed. I spent that Saturday in silence. I made eggs. I read a book cover to cover. I took a long walk down by the lake and let the wind undo the perfect bun I always wore for work. I didn't check social media. I didn't look at emails. I just existed. Later that evening, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat at the window watching the golden hour pass. Somewhere, probably at the same time, Haley stood alone in a designer gown in a wedding venue filled with strangers and questions, because there had been no wedding. I found out later, through a mutual acquaintance, Travis's cousin Jonah, whom I knew from college, that the ceremony had collapsed within hours of the rehearsal dinner. Mrs. Hamilton, the woman I'd turned to during my toast, had questions. What did she mean she'd asked my mother after I left? What instability my mother had stammered tried to change the subject, but it was too late. The illusion was cracked. By morning, Travis's family had called off their side of the event. The band never showed. The caterer backed out. The venue was locked. Haley had screamed at everyone. She'd cried until her makeup smeared, but nothing could be undone. I didn't gloat. I didn't even smile. There was a strange, hollow justice in it all, like watching a house crumble that you'd long ago moved out of. Still, I wasn't naive. The crash landing wasn't going to fix anything for me. Not really. So I started therapy. It felt indulgent at first, talking about myself, my feelings, not making myself small to make others comfortable. I remember my therapist, Dr. Kessler, a wiry woman in her 60s with a sharp tongue and kind eye, asked me, "When was the last time someone gave to you without asking for something in return?" I didn't have an answer, she said. That's where we begin. Over the next year, I set boundaries I never thought I was allowed to have. I changed my number. I blocked my family's emails. I removed myself from group chats and unsubscribed from guilt. My apartment, once sleek and sterile, slowly began to feel like home. I filled it with mismatched furniture, cozy throw blankets and prints I bought from local artists. I let friends over, not colleagues, not business partners, friends, people who saw me as a person, not a resource. I found peace in small things, planting herbs on the windowsill, taking dance classes with a neighbor named Lana, who once told me over dumplings that I had a fierce but exhausted aura. She wasn't wrong. I didn't regret what I did at the rehearsal dinner. But some nights when the world went quiet and the city lights blinked like tired eyes, I wondered if Haley ever thought about what she'd thrown away. Then one day, nearly 12 months after the wedding, that never was, I got a letter. A real letter. With a stamp. I stood there in the lobby of my building, fingers shaking slightly, as I read the return address. Haley Benson, Santa Monica, CA. My breath caught. I took it upstairs, sat on the edge of my couch, and opened it. Inside was a single white card. 5 words written in blue ink. "Can we please talk? I'm sorry." Nothing else. For 10 minutes, I just stared at it. Not out of anger. Not even shock. But because it was the first time she'd ever admitted she was wrong, without defense, without manipulation, without backup, I didn't reply right away. I sat with it. 3 days later, I sent her a short note back. "If you're serious, meet me. One time. Neutral ground. No expectations." We met in Milwaukee, halfway between us. It was raining, of course it was. I wore jeans and a sweater. No makeup, no armor. She looked smaller than I remembered. Her once perfect hair pulled into a messy bun, her hands shaking slightly as she wrapped them around a paper cup. "Hi," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "Hi." We sat in silence for almost 5 minutes. Then she said, "The wedding didn't happen. I guess you figured that out." I nodded. "My therapist says I built my whole identity around what people thought of me. I didn't even know who I was without the applause." I looked at her, really looked, and saw for the first time a girl who had never learned to grow up because someone else had always carried the weight. "I was jealous of you," she whispered. "Always have been. You were so capable. And I just played the part." I took a slow sip of coffee. It tasted bitter but grounding. "I wasn't always strong," I said. "I just didn't have the luxury of weakness." She looked down, blinking fast. "I'm getting divorced," she said. "Not because of Travis. Because I finally realized I'm not someone who knows how to love when she's always trying to be loved. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet, but it was the truth. And that mattered more. We parted after an hour. No big hugs, no promises, just a quiet understanding that something had cracked, and maybe, just maybe, something else could grow in its place. It wasn't a reunion, it wasn't even healing, but that coffee shop conversation planted something, a seed, or maybe just a pause in the war. After Milwaukee, I didn't rush to bring Haley back into my life. She didn't ask to be rushed either. We exchanged a few letters. Not texts, not emails. Handwritten like we were reclaiming some lost sense of honesty. Hers were always short, almost clumsy, as if she didn't trust herself not to say the wrong thing. Mine were measured careful, somewhere between cautious and curious. One day, she sent me a photo, just a small Polaroid of her standing in front of a community center with a sign behind her, free wellness and recovery workshop. All are welcome. On the back, she had written, "I volunteer here now, every Tuesday." It didn't erase what had happened, but it made space for something to be different. Meanwhile, my own life began reshaping itself. I started mentoring young women in Business Girls, like I had once been, full of fire and fear, trying to prove themselves to people who only saw their usefulness. One of them, Tasha, was 24, and building an eco-brand with more passion than structure. She told me during our first meeting, "Everyone keeps telling me I need a fallback plan. I just want to be the plan." I laughed because I saw myself in her. Too much, maybe. I helped her build her pitch deck, refine her budget, walk into a boardroom, and speak with the kind of voice that doesn't ask for permission. The kind of voice I had only just begun to use myself. She sent me a message 2 months later. A screenshot of her first investor check, followed by one line, "I'm not the backup. I'm the blueprint. Just like you said." It hit me harder than I expected. For so long, I had believed my worth was tied to what I could give. Pay for this, fix that. Show up, stay quiet, be dependable. But now, I was watching people bloom, not because of what I did for them, but because of what I taught them to do for themselves. There was a freedom in that. And with it came something else: forgiveness. Not just toward Haley or my parents, but toward myself. Because the truth was, I had stayed in that role for years. Not just because they asked me to, but because part of me believed it was the only way to earn love. I'd worn that competence like armor. And yes, it had protected me, but it had also kept me isolated. It wasn't until I took it off that people started seeing me. There was one NIG early spring. The windows open, a soft rain falling outside when Haley called. I didn't answer right away. I let it go to voicemail. Her voice was hesitant. "Hey, I know it's late. I just... I was driving home and past this little diner we used to go to with Mom, and I remembered you always ordered pancakes with extra syrup even for dinner. And I thought, maybe you'd want to go sometime. Just us." I sat there, the sound of the rain filling the room. She hadn't said sorry again. She hadn't begged. Just a small memory offered without expectation. I texted back, "Okay. One day." We didn't set a date. We didn't need to. It was enough that the door was open a crack, and that this time, I was the one who held the key. Back at work, I made a major decision. I stepped down as CEO. Not dramatically, not in disgrace. I just handed it off to my COO, Annabelle, who had been quietly running the day-to-day for the last year. I stayed on as a board advisor. But I stopped living inside strategy documents and performance charts. I started writing. Not books, not speeches, just thoughts. Moments I had swallowed whole for decades, about love, loyalty, identity. About the difference between being needed and being known. And slowly they started turning into essays. A friend from Stanford, who now edits a lifestyle column, published one and then another. Before I knew it, I had a small following. Women wrote to me. Men too. People who had carried families, carried companies, carried everyone but themselves. One woman wrote, I realized I've been the emergency contact in every life but my own. That line stayed with me because I had spent years being everyone's emergency contact and no one had been mine until I chose to be. Not by replacing my family with better versions, but by building something from scratch, a community, a purpose, a self that didn't depend on approval to exist. It was late May when I finally saw Haley again. Not at a diner, not at a reunion, but at a volunteer expo of all places. She was manning a small booth for the wellness center, handing out pamphlets with ink-smudged fingers. She looked up. Her mouth parted slightly unsure. I walked over. We didn't hug. We didn't cry. We just stood there, two grown women who had finally stepped out of the roles we were handed and into the truth of who we were. I said, "You're still bad at folding brochures." She laughed, a real one this time. "I'm working on it," she said. And maybe I thought, so am I. The next few months felt quieter, not in a lonely way, but in a settled one. The kind of quiet that comes after a long, hard winter, when you realize the silence is growth, not absence. Haley and I didn't suddenly become best friends. There were no sleepovers or sisterly road trips, but every so often I'd get a text. A photo of her cat sprawled across the kitchen floor. A video of a workshop she helped organize. A bad meme she thought I'd hate but sent anyway. I always replied. Sometimes with one word, sometimes with a full paragraph. Always with a sense that we were building something real, not fast. We eventually met for breakfast, not pancakes, not at that old diner, but at a quiet little cafe in Andersonville. We sat in the corner booth. She ordered French toast and I got black coffee and granola. It was one of those early spring mornings when the sunlight makes everything look gentler than it is. Haley fidgeted with the corner of her napkin. "I still have the dress," she said, not looking at me. I raised an eyebrow. "The $8.501. She chuckled under her breath. "Yeah, I didn't know what to do with it. Thought about donating it, but then I felt weird." I stirred my coffee. "Because it's still tied to who you were." She nodded. "Exactly." We were quiet for a moment. Then I said, "You don't have to know what to do with it right now. Just stop letting it hang in your closet like a ghost." That conversation stayed with both of us. I think we both had closets filled with ghosts. Versions of ourselves we thought we had to be. Mistakes we weren't sure we could ever outgrow. But the thing about ghosts, they fade. If you stop feeding them. A few weeks later, she sent me a photo of an empty hanger. I didn't ask where the dress went. I just smiled. Meanwhile, my life was full, but not in the overstuffed way it used to be. It wasn't about proving I was worthy anymore. It was about being present. My dinner table no longer glistened with polished flatware or catered menus. It was mismatched chairs, ceramic bowls from the flea market, and old jazz playing softly in the background. It was people, real ones, who didn't ask for anything but time. Lana came by, often bringing fresh pasta or bad wine. Tasha sometimes dragged her laptop over to work next to me, just for the comfort of quiet support. Even my doorman Frank stopped in one night when the power on his floor went out, and we ended up talking about his late wife for an hour over tea. I wasn't fixing anyone. I wasn't funding anyone. I was just in with them. And in that being, I finally understood what it meant to belong. Not because you're useful, not because you're flawless, but because you're you. Then one day, another letter came. From my mother. Elaine's handwriting was still as perfect as ever, looped and controlled. Inside was a short note. "I know I failed you. I wish I had understood sooner. I don't expect forgiveness. Just maybe someday. A seat across the table. There were no excuses. No justifications. Just the brittle, quiet voice of someone learning too late. I didn't write back. Not right away. I let the letter sit on my kitchen counter for 2 weeks. Then I folded it, tucked it in the back of a notebook, and went on with my life. Because forgiveness doesn't always mean reconciliation. Sometimes it's simply laying down the burden and walking away lighter. I still carry some scars, little echoes of those years where love meant sacrifice and silence meant peace. But I don't let them shape me anymore, because now I get to choose what family means. For me, it's a table I built from scratch, filled with people who laugh too loud, eat dessert first, and show up without keeping score. Last week at a brunch, I hosted one of the women I mentor brought her younger sister. She sat quietly, most of the meal eyes flicking around the table, absorbing the chatter, the easy teasing the way no one tried to dominate the room. As they were leaving, she pulled me aside. She said I didn't know families could feel like this. And that was the moment I knew whatever pain I'd been through, whatever I had walked away from, I had built something better, something whole. Because for so long I gave my place away at the table and called it love. Now I know the most valuable seat isn't the one someone invites you to. It's the one you create with your own hands at a table only truth and kindness can occupy. And when you sit there surrounded by people who don't need anything from you but you, that's when you finally understand what it means to be home. It took losing everything I thought family was to finally understand what love could be. When my sister Haley uninvited me from her wedding, the one I had quietly fully funded, I thought I was walking away from them in anger. But what I walked into was clarity, freedom. I learned that generosity without respect become an expectation. That showing up for others doesn't mean shrinking yourself. That love is not a transaction, no matter how much you pay. Over time, through therapy space and cautious reconnection, I began rebuilding, not the relationships I once had, but the identity I had long buried beneath competence and obligation. I discovered joy in imperfection, in ordinary mornings, in mismatched chairs, and people who stayed even when I had nothing left to give. Haley changed too. We met again, not as sisters by duty, but as women trying to unlearn the roles we were given. There's still space between us, but now it's filled with honesty, not silence. I don't regret the money I spent, or even the pain I endured, because from those ashes, I built something better. A table of my own, and around it sits laughter, courage, quiet apologies, and new beginnings. I used to believe I was the backup plan. Now I know I was always the blueprint.